All right, so you're here with us on the deep dive because, well, let's face it, you're the kind of person who wants to get to the heart of things. You want to understand what's really going on, what's really at stake, without getting lost in the weeds.
That's exactly it. And we're here to help you cut through all that noise to sort of distill things down to the essential knowledge, give you those key pieces that unlock a deeper understanding.
And the topic we're diving into today, the consequences of deportation. You might think, okay, deportation, someone being sent back to their home country, right? Simple enough. But the article we dug into, well, it paints a much more complicated picture, I gotta say.
Yeah, it really emphasizes that this is not a straightforward process. Deportation, formally speaking, is the removal of a person from a country. And the reasons usually have to do with violating immigration laws. But it all plays out within like this huge, intricate legal web. There are so many layers to it.
Absolutely. And for this deep dive, we're working with one really comprehensive article. This gives us like this wide angle lens to really see just how multifaceted this whole issue is, how the consequences ripple outward, touching so many lives.
Right. And our mission today is to bring you the most important insights. What actually happens when someone is deported? And what are the consequences? Not just for that individual, but for their families and for the broader community.
So let's kick things off with something that doesn't always get the attention it deserves, but it's a crucial piece of this puzzle, the emotional and psychological impact of deportation. And trust me, this is heavy stuff.
You know, the article really drives home the profound emotional and psychological toll this takes, not just on the individuals being deported,
Yeah.
but on everyone connected to them. It's like this huge wave of emotional fallout.
Exactly. It's not just about leaving a place, it's about being ripped away from everything familiar, everything you know.
Imagine, like this sudden forced separation. Your home, your friends, the community you've built a life in, and of course, most importantly, your loved ones, the people you care about most in the world. That kind of separation, that abrupt severing of ties, it can be incredibly traumatic.
Yeah, it's not hard to see how that would lead to some pretty serious emotional distress. I mean, we're
Agreed.
talking about anxiety, deep depression, this feeling of utter helplessness.
Absolutely. And think about it, for those who've really put down roots, who've lived here for years, maybe decades, who've built lives, contributed to society, there's a profound sense of loss. The article talks about it as a loss of identity, this feeling of no longer belonging, like a part of who they are has been ripped away.
And when we talk about the impact on children, it gets even more heartbreaking. They might not understand the legal complexities, but they sure feel the absence, the disruption, the uncertainty.
It's really rough on them. The article points out how this can have serious consequences for their development. Socially, emotionally, even academically. It can throw up roadblocks in their education, affect their mental health, make it harder for them to integrate socially. This stuff can really leave a mark, especially during such crucial developmental years.
Yeah, it's tough to even imagine what that must be like for a kid. And it's not just the children who are deported who are hurting. The families who stay behind, they carry a huge burden too.
Oh, absolutely. The article talks about this constant anxiety, this feeling of never knowing what's going to happen next. There's grief, obviously, but also this huge increase in stress in just everyday life. And it can put so much strain on family relationships. Everything gets thrown out of whack.
Yeah, the family dynamic is just completely disrupted. And I imagine parents who are left behind, they must grapple with a ton of guilt, a lot of anxiety, this feeling that they couldn't protect their children. It's got to be so tough.
And that's why it's so important for them to find ways to cope. The article really stresses that. Finding healthy outlets, seeking professional help, connecting with support groups, anything that can help them manage this emotional roller coaster.
And maintaining those family connections, even if they're separated by borders, that's huge. The article talks about technology, video calls, messaging, all these ways to stay connected, even if it's not in person. It might seem like a small thing, but it can make a world of difference.
Now, shifting gears a bit, let's talk about the economic consequences of deportation. And this is where things get really interesting because it's easy to think of this as just an individual issue, but the article makes a compelling case that it's much bigger than that. The economic ripples spread far and wide.
Absolutely. There's the immediate loss of income, of course. Someone who's been working, supporting their family, suddenly they're gone, and that income disappears. Which can be devastating, especially when you consider that many families rely on that income for basic needs.
Right, think about it. Housing, food, education, healthcare, all the essentials. And suddenly, that safety net is gone. And as the article points out, this loss of income can have a ripple effect on the whole community.
Exactly. It can lead to a decrease in spending, which hurts local businesses, especially in areas with a high concentration of immigrant families. It can destabilize entire neighborhoods.
And it can also lead to labor shortages, particularly in industries that rely heavily on immigrant labor, like agriculture or construction. Those are sectors that often struggle to fill positions, and deportations can exacerbate that problem.
And the bigger picture is this climate of uncertainty, the sense of instability that can permeate entire communities. When deportations increase, businesses might hesitate to invest, families might hold back on spending. It can really throw a wrench into the economic engine of a community.
And don't forget the financial burden of fighting deportation. The legal fees involved can be astronomical. Families often end up draining their savings just trying to navigate this complex legal system, which of course adds another layer of stress and hardship to an already difficult situation.
Absolutely. Now, beyond the immediate emotional and economic impacts, the article really delves into the specific consequences for families, and especially for children left behind. This is a whole other layer of the story, and it's one that deserves a lot of attention.
Right. We touched on the emotional toll earlier, but it's important to understand that the consequences can be long-lasting. The article talks about children experiencing feelings of abandonment, fear, uncertainty, this sense of not knowing what's going to happen to them or their family. It can be incredibly traumatizing.
And the disruption to family structure can be huge. Kids might have to move in with relatives, or older siblings might have to take on parental roles. It puts an enormous strain on the whole family.
Yeah, resources get stretched thin, emotionally, financially, sometimes even physically. It's a lot to handle. And as the article points out, this often leads to socioeconomic challenges. Families might struggle to make ends meet. They might face poverty. They might have trouble accessing basic necessities like housing, food, healthcare.
And it's no surprise that this can have a huge impact on children's education. They're dealing with all this emotional turmoil. They might have to work to help support their family, and their ability to focus on school, to succeed academically, well, it takes a hit.
Absolutely. And sadly, it doesn't stop there. The article mentions the possibility of increased bullying, social stigma, all those things that can make school a really tough environment for these kids. And of course, there's the issue of attendance. If they have to work or if they're dealing with emotional distress, they might miss school, which further sets them back.
And the article takes it a step further, broadening the lens to look at the societal repercussions of deportation policies. And this is where we see how these individual and family impacts can really scale up and affect the whole community.
Yeah, because it's not just about the people directly involved, right? It's about how these policies shape our perceptions, our attitudes towards immigrant communities. And unfortunately, the article suggests that they can create a climate of fear and mistrust.
Exactly. It can fuel xenophobia, this idea that immigrants are somehow dangerous or that
Hmm.
they're a drain on society, which just isn't true. And it can lead to harmful stereotypes and generalizations.
And on a broader level, these policies often contribute to social division, to polarization. The whole conversation around immigration can get so heated, so politically charged, and that can make it really hard to find common ground, to build bridges.
But amidst all this, there's a glimmer of hope, and the article highlights that too, the power of activism, of community-based responses. It's inspiring to see how grassroots organizations are stepping up, supporting those facing deportations, raising awareness, providing resources to families, and advocating for more humane policies.
They're doing incredible work. They're fighting for change, pushing back against harmful narratives, and reminding us that behind these policies are real people with real lives and real stories. And as the article points out, these efforts can have a real impact, both locally and nationally.
They can influence how resources are allocated, how social services are provided, and even how policies are shaped. They're a force to be reckoned with. Now, let's dive into the legal side of things, because as we mentioned earlier, deportation is deeply entwined with a complex and often challenging legal system.
And what's really striking here is the vulnerability of immigrants facing deportation. They have the right to an attorney, but that doesn't mean one is automatically provided. So navigating this system with all its intricacies and deadlines without legal counsel, well, it can be a nightmare.
And the article talks about asylum, which is a legal pathway for those who have a well-founded fear of persecution in their home country. But it's not a simple process. There are specific requirements, specific deadlines, and having a lawyer to guide you through all that is crucial.
Exactly. And beyond asylum, there are other forms of relief, like cancellation of removal or adjustment of status. But again, figuring out if you're eligible, navigating all the paperwork, it's incredibly complex. You really need expert legal advice to even know where to start.
And the article brings up a crucial point about the intersection of criminal law and immigration law. Certain criminal convictions can have serious consequences in deportation proceedings. So understanding both systems, both sets of laws, is absolutely vital for anyone facing this situation.
And this brings us to the question of human rights, because the article raises some really important concerns about whether the deportation process always adheres to international human rights standards.
And it's a valid concern. We have to consider things like the conditions in detention centers. Are people being treated humanely? Do they have access to basic necessities, to health care, to legal assistance? There are serious questions there.
And the principle of non-refoulement, which basically means not sending someone back to a place where they'll face persecution or harm, that's a cornerstone of international law. The article emphasizes the need for thorough risk assessments to ensure that we're not violating that principle.
Because at the end of the day, we're talking about people's lives. And the broader human rights implications of deportation, the separation of families, the emotional trauma, the impact on communities, we can't ignore that.
And the article brings all this to life through some really powerful personal stories. Stories from people who've experienced the realities of deportation firsthand.
Maria's story is a prime example. She was deported after living in the U.S. for over a decade, separated from her children, forced to start over in a place that felt unfamiliar. It highlights the devastating impact on families, the financial struggles, the challenges of reintegrating into a different culture.
And then there's Alejandro, who faced deportation after a minor traffic violation. His story really underscores how these policies can create a climate of fear in entire communities. It's not just about one person being deported, it affects everyone around them.
And Fatima's story is equally powerful. She'd been living in the U.S. since she was a toddler, and being sent back to a country she barely knew was deeply traumatic. It shows the challenges of reintegration, the loss of social connections, the economic hardships, the psychological toll.
These stories, they put a human face on this issue. They remind us that behind the statistics, behind the legal complexities, are real people whose lives are being turned upside down. And they really drive home the point that the consequences of deportation are multifaceted and far-reaching.
So wrapping up this deep dive, it's clear that the issues surrounding deportation are incredibly complex. There's a lot to unpack, and the impacts are profound.
The article definitely makes a case for reform. It calls for more humane policies that take into account the human cost of these decisions.
It emphasizes the need to look beyond just the legal framework and consider individual circumstances to approach these situations with empathy and understanding.
And it highlights the importance of community advocacy, of people coming together to support those affected, to raise awareness, and to push for change.
So as we move forward, it's crucial to foster a culture of inclusivity, to work towards comprehensive immigration reform that prioritizes human rights and recognizes the dignity of every individual.
And that leads us to a final thought, something for you to ponder. Given the intricate web of connections between individuals, families, and communities, what does a truly just and ethical immigration system look like? It's a question worth asking, a question that deserves serious consideration.
That's it for this episode of The Deep Dive. Thanks for joining us, and keep those brain gears turning. We'll see you next time.